One of the brake pads is significantly thinner than the other. And as soon as I see that, I suspect slide pins. Oh my gosh. All the grease here is like glue. It's sludgy, sticky. I think everyone is capable of doing their own brakes, and I think they should, because it's one of the best ways to save money on your car. And it's a fairly straightforward job, but even seasoned DIYers make some common mistakes when they're working on their brakes that can lead to costly repairs and even be quite dangerous. So in today's video, I'm gonna go over the top 7 mistakes that backyard mechanics make, how you can avoid them and do your brakes properly and safely every time. In addition, I'm gonna share with you a game-changing trick that I learned many years ago that takes the hardest part of a brake job and makes it way easier. Now, the first mistake people make is replacing their brake pads without replacing their brake rotors when they actually should be. Now, I'm not saying that you have to replace your brake rotors every time. In fact, we made a video on how you can avoid ever having to replace your brake rotors for the lifetime of your vehicle. The most common symptoms of a bad brake rotor are, number 1, that shaking in the steering wheel under hard braking, which comes from a warped rotor, which you can't actually see with your eye. 2, you'll get squeaking or squealing sounds coming from your brakes, which can be brake pads, but often are a glazed brake rotor as well. And you can kind of see that in the color and the surface of a brake rotor. 3, physical signs of a worn out rotor, whether that be rust pitting or deep grooving from an old brake rotor that's wearing out. You get a lip on the edge, shows that the brake rotor is physically damaged. So there are many instances where the rotor is the issue with the brakes, and if you just replace the pads, you're still gonna have the problem. The next mistake that people make is installing these little brake wear indicators incorrectly. Now, the way that these are supposed to work is there are these little tabs of metal that are installed with the brake pad that when the brake pad wears out, it rubs on the rotor, makes a sound that lets you know that it's time to change your brake pads. Now, sometimes pads come with these little feelers or indicators pre-installed, and then all you got to do is put the pad in correctly. However, some pads come, like these ones did, without any feelers installed. So there's a little baggie with hardware, and you got to get them out and put them on. And they're actually important for spacing out your pad in the caliper so that there's no slop. So you do want to use them. Now, when it comes to actually installing the brake pad with the indicator and the correct orientation, you want to think about the wheel spinning forward, and it's going to run, you want it to run into the indicator first. So if this pad was going to go on the back side here, I would put it like this so that the wheel rotates into the indicator first. If I were to put it on the outside like this, it's going to the pad, then the indicator, and technically that is incorrect. Now, not all sets of brake pads have a wear indicator on every pad. So what I see a lot of is people put 2 brake pads with indicators on one side of the car, and on the other side they have 2 pads that don't have indicators. So you just want to make sure that there's at least one indicator on each side of the car. Before we go on to the next one, if you're enjoying this video, make sure you go leave us a comment, like the video, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. As you know, with brakes, a big part of the process is recompressing those caliper pistons so they fit over the new brake pads. And there's lots of tools that you can get that will do that job, but sometimes it can be the most difficult part of a brake job. So make sure you stick around to the end. I'm gonna show you how to do it super easy, and you don't even need tools. But here's the mistake I see people make. This caliper style is like a lot of them. You just have to press those pistons back in. But some cars, Ford and others, have a piston, usually a single piston, that is designed to not only be pressed, but also turned and screwed in. And they'll often be indicated by having like a cross on them or some kind of pattern, double holes. And essentially, if you try to press that style of piston in, you can damage the whole caliper. So if you've got your C-clamp going or you've got your caliper spreader tool and it's getting really tight and not moving, you've got to stop. There's a good chance that it's designed to also be screwed in. Those style calipers can be done with basic tools, but they're a lot easier if you get the appropriate fitting tool for that kind of caliper. Speaking of tools, if you are going to be working on your own brakes, it's not a bad idea to get your own caliper spreader tool. I really like this style, only like 20 bucks online, and like all of our tools, we'll put a link in the description. The next mistake people make is very common, and I'm not going to lie, I used to do it a lot. But when you come to replace your rotor, you have to totally unbolt your caliper, and usually we're tempted just to set it here while we deal with the rotor, right? Problem is, classic, you go to take your rotor off, you're using a big hammer, you're banging on stuff, this caliper falls down hanging on the brake line. And what actually happened to me, and why I don't do this anymore, is I was working on a big truck and the caliper fell and just snap the brake line right off. And I had to end up replacing the whole line going up into the engine compartment, and it was a huge nightmare. Brake fluid everywhere. So what you want to do is get this thing hung up in a really secure way so it's away from the brake rotor. They make little S-hooks that are really great for hanging it on the shock absorber. I'm always losing mine, so all you really need is a piece of strong string, or I use like this wire I keep in my little brake kit, and you put it through the caliper, and then usually the shock absorber spring is like a perfect thing. You just tie it up, do a little twist. So now this is out of the way, stress is off the brake line, and you're not going to break anything. Another reason you don't really want to rest a big heavy caliper right here is because this thin metal shield will actually get bent and rub on the rotor. So you get everything back together, you're driving down the road, and you get like a terrible scraping noise because this metal shield got bent in. Now, a properly functioning caliper actually is able to float back and forth as you press the brake and release the brake, and it's able to do that because of caliper slide pins. On this one, you can see the slide pin is in the caliper bracket, and there it is. Which leads us to our next common mistake. People neglect to grease these pins, and eventually they get all dried up and sticky. The caliper is no longer able to float back and forth, and it gets stuck in one position or another, and that's where you will get what is actually happening on this van right now. As you can see, one of the brake pads is significantly thinner than the other. And as soon as I see that, I suspect slide pins, and sure enough, I go down here and this slide pin is very sticky. This should freely slide in and out, and it is totally stuck. This, oh my gosh. So you can see the grease on this is old, dried up, sticky, and this slide pin is just getting jammed in here, and that's what's causing these brake pads to wear so unevenly. So what you want to do every single time you change your brakes is get these pins out, clean them really well, wipe all that old grease off, and you want to apply some brake caliper grease. We'll link to that here so you can get some online if you want. You're just going to put a good amount of grease on this pin all the way around. Be generous. And you don't want to mix up the upper and lower pins. They can often be different lengths. This one has a rubber ring on it, whereas this one doesn't. So you just want to put them back exactly where you got them, and make sure that they go in and that the rubber boot kind of clips on there. Now you can see that I've got the new grease on there. This thing slides super easy. That's how it's supposed to be. The next mistake that people make is actually a pretty big safety concern. Because the calipers were spread out to fit over the new brake pads, there's actually a gap. And the first time you go to press the brake down, the pedal's gonna go all the way to the floor, maybe even twice, before the brakes actually come tight. So if you don't pump the brakes before you start driving, you could actually get in a situation where your foot will just go straight to the floor and the car won't stop. I've actually seen this happen where a guy changed his brakes, went to back out of his driveway, his foot went to the floor when he tried to stop, and he ran right into the car behind him. While the car is still in park, start the car up and pump the brakes a few times until it gets firm. Then you're good to go. The next mistake people make is when they are working on their rear brakes. So what happens is people, rightly so, set their parking brake to be safe when they're working on their brakes and find that they can't remove their rear rotor. And the reason for this is the rear brake actually spreads out and pinches the inside of this rear rotor, and so therefore when you go to try to take it off, the brake is grabbing it, so you can't remove it. So I've seen a lot of people struggling with this, trying to pound this off with hammers, pry it off with pry bars, and what they don't realize is the rear brake is what's holding this rotor on, and all they have to do is let that brake go, it'll come right off. So when you do your rear brakes, you want to chalk your wheels first, make sure that rear brake is disengaged, and this rotor should come right off. If your rotor's still stuck after that, you're going to want to go over and check out our other video we made on the tips and tricks for removing stuck brake rotors. Link above. So for this trick, all you need is a flathead screwdriver, and you want to do this before you take the caliper off. So you got to just remember to do it before you take everything apart. But you just come in here through the back of the caliper, through this hole, you slide the screwdriver into a slot in the rotor, and you start levering out away. And this compresses the piston against the old pad. And then once you've done it a little while, you can take another bite. Now if you're planning to replace rotor anyway, you don't have to worry about scratching it or whatever, which is why you want to do this before you take everything apart and put new parts on. So once you've done that, then you can carry on with the brake job, and when you put the new pads in, the caliper will fit right over those new pads and you're done. It's really that easy. Now if for some reason you can't do this on your brakes, maybe you have the different kind of caliper or the screw type piston, so what you want to do is pull either the upper or lower mounting bolts for the caliper. That allows you to pivot up on the other bolt. So that way you're not hanging on the brake line, you're not having to hold it in space and fight it. It's got a nice little platform. So if you happen to have a caliper spreading tool like this, it's very easy to work on it here, and you have some stability. Now if you don't have a tool, you can still sometimes come back and try the screwdriver method by pulling out the outer brake pad, setting this back down, and then you've got a nice big gap here, which will sometimes allow you to get a screwdriver in easier than when both of the bolts are on. If you like this video, you're definitely going to want to check out the other one we made on the top mistakes people make changing their oil. If you can think of any other brake mistakes, make sure you let us know in the comments.